The United Nations says Sudan has experienced the worst humanitarian catastrophe in recent history, greater than either the Middle East or Ukraine. Over 12 million people have been displaced since fighting erupted 20 months ago, which has so far led to the deaths of an estimated 150,000 people. The country has been mired in civil war since April last year, with the government army, the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces locked in battle for control of the country. Sudan is Africa's third largest country with a population of 50 million, more than 3 million of whom have sought refuge in neighbouring countries, mainly Chad, Egypt and South Sudan. The health system has broken down and the economy has collapsed, threatening food security for 26 million people. Various militias have emerged, entering the fray to defend their territory. One of those groups, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, controls the remote Nuba mountain region in the state of South Kordofan. In the first of a three-part series, reporter Aengus Cox and cameraman Enda O'Byrne report from there on the impact the civil war is having on the people of Sudan.
Sudan is a country divided. Its capital, Khartoum, lies largely in ruin after more than a year and a half of conflict. While fighting is mostly contained to urban areas, its reach is much broader. For the 3 million inhabitants of the Nuba Mountains in remote South Kordofan, life has been uncomplicated. Building their own homes, growing enough food to sustain them, and selling any extra at the market. But with the host community welcoming 1 million internally displaced people, or IDPs who fled the war, that's dramatically changed.
The host community, they received the IDPs, the small food that was saved by the host community, they shared with the IDPs. The IDP now, they have been moved to the camps and living out the host community. The world has paid deaf ears to the people of Nuba Mountains. If you see the crisis in Gaza, if you see the crisis in Lebanon, the world is paying the attention, but they are not paying attention to the crisis of Nuba Mountains. The children are dying.
The influx of displaced people has made the few resources here even more scarce, which is having a domino effect.
The cataract here.
High in the Nuba Mountains is the only full-service hospital for hundreds of kilometres, where one issue dominates among patients.
Well, this year, 2024, malnutrition was a big issue. At our nutrition ward, we were seeing easily 10 times the number we normally see. And this is the first time we've had adult malnutrition. In years past, we always had children that were malnourished. This year, we've had several adults coming in with malnutrition. And, you know, pregnant women especially are very vulnerable because they need extra caloric needs during the pregnancy. They get malnourished. One of the results of that is they can go into preterm labor and deliver a preterm infant. Baby comes out, they don't have any milk. Baby becomes malnourished and dies.
We meet a woman at a nearby displacement camp where malnutrition is rife, who tells us she and her 6 children were chased from their home and walked for days to get here. But when they arrived, there was no food. For 3 months, they sustained themselves on wild fruits and boiled and ate grass and leaves just to feel full before aid eventually reached them. 3 of her children suffered severe malnutrition and still bear the effects. Getting supplies into places like South Kordofan is a logistical nightmare. Sudan is a sprawling country, but its infrastructure has crumbled. Outside of main cities, roads are virtually non-existent. Fighting has cut off supply lines to the north, leaving just one access route from the south. This is the only road open to the Nuba Mountains, and pretty much any aid they get has to come this way. But as you can see, it's a rough trip at the best of times. During the dry season, which we're in now, that journey can take anywhere between 8 and 12 hours from the aid distribution centre in South Sudan to the camps. But when it's been raining, it can take a lot longer, up to 2 days sometimes, or even more, to make the journey. There are 15 displacement camps in the region, and whatever aid comes this way doesn't last long.
In Sudan, close to 25 million people are facing protection and humanitarian crisis. The most challenge here is to bring logistics. As you can see, the infrastructure is less developed and the funding is really low compared to the need.
And do you have enough aid to help all of the people here?
No. It's like one of the greatest, one of the severe crisis in the world, but it's underfunded.
Sudan has received a fraction of the attention of conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, but it could prove to be worse than either. And there's an emerging consensus that without swift action, the country faces mass starvation on a scale never witnessed before. Aengus Cox, RTE News, in the Nuba Mountains in Sudan.
For more on this unfolding crisis, I've been speaking to Tess Ingram, spokesperson for UNICEF, which has declared Sudan the world's largest child displacement crisis. She's been in Sudan for the past 3 weeks. I first asked her what she's seen in that time.
I've seen a lot of fear and a lot of desperation. I've travelled around primarily to communities that people have fled to, running away from violence. There's more children in Sudan on the run from this conflict than anywhere else in the world, 5 million, which is about the population of Ireland. So you can imagine the scale of the displacement crisis here. And everywhere that I went, I really saw the tough living conditions that people are facing after experiencing the horrors of conflict. People are living without access to safe water, without access to toilets. I was in one community in the north where people have been living under Hessian sacks for the best part of 2 years. So the situation is really desperate for both the people that remain in the conflict-affected areas and for those that are now living outside of those in a supposedly safe place, but without the basics that they need to survive.
Now, there's a couple of issues, I suppose, to deal with. The most serious, I guess, is famine. There's millions of children suffering from malnutrition, and many of them are facing famine conditions. How serious is that threat?
It's really serious. We shouldn't allow a situation to get to the point of famine. There are warning systems in place that measure food insecurity and have different levels of threat. Famine is the worst level, and ideally we intervene before it gets to that point. When there is a famine, it means children are dying, and that is where we are at now in the west of Sudan. There are 14 other areas that are right on the precipice of that famine declaration. So it's really, really serious. Children are starving, children are dying, and we have to intervene by bringing in aid. But it's incredibly difficult for us to get to some of these areas at the moment because of access restrictions and bureaucratic impediments.
Now, we just saw in the report from our colleagues who travelled to Sudan the logistical difficulties that you mentioned, bad roads being just one of them. How difficult is it for aid to get in, and what should the international community be doing to try and improve that?
So getting aid into Sudan isn't the biggest problem. It's getting aid around Sudan. As you said, the roads are really challenging. I've experienced it firsthand in the last 3 weeks. Some of these roads, because of the condition of them, take hours to traverse. Really bumpy, really big holes in the roads, full of water. So it's really difficult to get around. But then on top of that, we need permission to move into most areas in Sudan, and we don't always get that permission in a timely manner or at all. So it's really important that all parties to the conflict allow us to move, cross state borders, cross conflict lines to bring this aid to the people that need it, because the costs of not doing that are enormous. We're talking about children dying, and that should be on everybody's minds, including the international community, who can do more. We're 20 months into this war. The international community can absolutely do more. One, to try and stop this war, but two, to try and make sure that we are able to bring aid to the children and the families that need it, because right now it is not getting where it needs to go.
OK, Tess Ingram of UNICEF in Sudan, thanks so much for joining us on 6-1.